Thanks, guys. Tim, alcoholic. Okay, so tonight we're going to get into part two of the big book. And the title to the second section here is They Stopped in Time. And the idea behind there, and I think the reading, this page reading is going to allude to it, but the fact of the matter is that the bottom isn't as bad, isn't as dramatic. And I think that's a kudos to Alcoholics Anonymous and the way that we have made it accessible to a much greater audience membership. Among today's incoming AA members, many have never reached the advanced stages of alcoholism, though given time, all might have. Most of these fortunate ones have had little or no acquaintance with delirium, with hospitals, asylums, and jails. Some were drinking heavily, and there had been occasional serious episodes. But with many, drinking had been little more than a sometimes uncontrollable nuisance. Seldom had any of these lost their health, business, family, or friends. Why do men and women like these join AA? The 17 who now tell their experiences answer that question. They saw that they had become actual or potential alcoholics, even though no serious harm had yet been done. They realized that repeated lack of drinking control, when they really wanted control, was the fatal symptom that spelled problem drinking. This, plus mounting emotional disturbances, convinced them that compulsive alcoholism already had them. That complete ruin would be only a question of time. Seeing this danger, they came to AA. They realized that in the end, alcoholism could be as mortal as cancer. Certainly, no sane man would wait for a malignant growth to become fatal before seeking help. Therefore, these 17 AAs and hundreds of thousands like them have been saved years of infinite suffering. They sum it up something like this. We didn't wait to hit bottom because, thank God, we could see the bottom. Actually, the bottom came up and hit us. That sold us on Alcoholics Anonymous. So I think we're going to see that's the theme of all the stories in part two. When I originally spoke to Rob about continuing on with this thing, I knew I didn't know that much about the author of this story, The Missing Link. It's new to the fourth edition. And as a generalized statement, as our weeks go on, anything that's new to the fourth edition, the amount of data about the author is far more limited than if it were a third edition or a second edition story. And typically because they're alive, and it's a very protected sort of thing. But when I read through the story, it sort of came to me. It's sort of we didn't need to skip it and go to one that maybe enticed you into maybe some of the historical elements about what the author was maybe significant for. It came to me that the author was very good about giving us a lot of data. Now, of course, we don't know his name. But we know a lot of other things, and we know why this story. I believe I know why this story was chosen. Number one reason is age. Comes into the program at age 18. Not that common of a thing, right? Gets sober in writes the story at age 25 with 7 years sobriety. Writes it very well, I might add. As I went through it, I was impressed with that. The author is Jewish. The author suffered from depression. The author was initially agnostic and then came to believe. So I believe this was the reason why this resonated with the committee that would, choose a story. Now, of course, stories are cycled out for various reasons. It doesn't resonate as much with our current membership. We're always looking for identification. So if maybe it's two stories or they're redundant, they're kind of making the same point, one could typically be pulled out for no other reason other than that, and one added that's going to resonate more with our demographics or and maybe customs or whatnot. Some are pulled out because maybe the author wasn't successful with sobriety long term. But the idea that the stories in the book are for identification needs to be paramount. I stopped quite a long time ago of getting somebody brand new into the program and say, oh, here, let's get a big book. Go read the doctor's opinion. I don't do that. And this is one of the beauties, I think, of this exercise, is that I'm in the process now of writing next to each story 2, 3, 4 key points of the what is the elements of the story that can be used if I meet somebody and I say, oh, well, the guy is young, the guy is white collar, the guy high bottom. I can point him to a particular story that would most likely resonate with him. So that critical eye, I think, is the place where the story is best used. Stories are best used. So let's stop that and let's get going. The missing link, we're on page 281. He looked at everything as the cause of his unhappiness except alcohol. So what's that? That's the missing link. He never really associated the problem as alcohol. When I was 8 or 9 years old, life suddenly became very difficult. Feelings began to emerge that I did not understand. Depression crept into my life as I started to feel alone, even in crowded rooms. In fact, life didn't make much sense to me at all. It's hard to say what sparked all of this, to pinpoint one fact or event that changed everything forever. The fact of the matter was, I was miserable from early on in my life. It was all very confusing. I remember isolating on the playground, watching all the other children laughing and playing and smiling, and not feeling like I could relate at all. I felt different. I didn't feel as if I was one of them. Somehow I thought I didn't fit in. Now, we've all heard this in the rooms. This is such a common theme for alcoholics, feeling as though they're different, don't fit in. My school marks soon reflected these feelings. My behavior and attitude seemed to become troublesome to everyone around me. I soon began spending more time in the principal's office than in the classroom. My parents, perplexed by such an unhappy son, began having difficulties. My house was soon filled with sounds of arguments and yelling about how to handle me. I found that running away from home could supply me with some sort of temporary solace, until, of course, the police would find me and bring me back to my house and my worried parents. So there's his geographics, trying to get away from this thing, not knowing what it was. It certainly felt unhappy, felt as though depression was the key element, and it probably was a major part of it. And he hadn't found the solution yet. About that time, I started seeing therapists and specialists, each with a different theory and a different solution. They conducted special tests and interviews designed to get to the root of my troubles, and came to the conclusion that I had a learning disability and was depressed. The psychiatrist started me on some medication, and the problems in school started to clear up. Even some of the depression began to ease up for a bit. However, something still seemed fundamentally wrong. Whatever the problem, I soon found what appeared to be the solution to everything. Solution, small s, lowercase s. At age 15, I traveled with my family to Israel. My brother was to be bar mitzvahed atop Masada. There was no legal drinking age, so I found it quite easy to walk into a bar and order a drink. New Year's Eve fell in the middle of the trip, and since the Jewish calendar celebrates a different New Year than the Gregorian calendar, the only celebration was being held in the American sector of a university. I got drunk for the first time that night. It changed everything, age 15. A stop at a local bar began the evening. I ordered a beer from the waitress, and as I took the first sip, Something was immediately different. I looked around me at the people drinking and dancing and smiling and laughing, all of whom were much older than I. Suddenly, I somehow felt I belonged. From there, I made my way to the university, where I found hundreds of Americans celebrating New Year's Eve. Before the night was over, I had started a fight with a number of college-age drunken fellows and returned to the hotel stinking drunk and riddled with bruises. Ah, yes, what a grand evening it was. I fell in love that night with the beverage. Bill tells the same story when he was at Fort Rodman preparing to go over to England during World War I. And he's in Bedford, Mass. And he gets, first time he's out of the gate, drinks the Bronx cocktail, gets stinking drunk the first night. Returning to the States, I was determined to continue with my newfound love affair. I found myself trying to convince my friends to join me, but I was met with resistance. Still determined, I set out to find new friends who could help me maintain this fantastic solution to my most desperate problems. My escapade started as a weekend pursuit and progressed into a daily obsession. At first, it took several beers to get me drunk to my satisfaction. However, within 3 years, it took a fifth and a half of vodka, a bottle of wine, and several beers in an evening's time to satisfactorily black me out. I would obtain alcohol by any means necessary. That meant lying, stealing, and cheating. My motto was, if you felt like I did, you'd have to get drunk too. So now we go from 15, now we're age 18. He's already showing the signs of true alcoholism. Here's his jumping off place, I believe. As the feelings of hopelessness and depression progressed, so did my drinking. Thoughts of suicide came more and more frequently. It felt as if things were never going to change. Progress with my therapist came to an almost complete halt. The hopelessness was compounded by the fact that one thing that was bringing me relief, the one thing I counted on to take the pain away, was ultimately destroying me. The end I feared was close. Hopelessness, desperation, gift of desperation, bottom. I think all of these words are apropos. My last semester in high school marked my bottom. It was everyday drinking then. Since I had already been accepted at college, I consciously decided to make that last semester one big party, but it was no fun at all. It was miserable. I graduated narrowly and I took a job at a local garage. It was difficult to manage my drinking and a job since they were both full-time. But I concocted all kinds of lies to ensure that nothing would interfere with my drinking. After being repeatedly reprimanded at work for being late in the morning, I made up a story to hide the fact that I was always hungover. I told my manager that I had cancer and needed to go to the doctor for treatment every morning. I would say whatever I needed to say to protect my drinking. So we hear that story quite often where we say, you know, a grandparent is sick. I think this is the first time that I've heard such a big lie. You know, actually, I have the cancer myself. But I loved his use of the word there. It was back on the bottom of the last page. It was difficult to manage my drinking, trying to manage that which is unmanageable. So we're still in step one. He's still trying to manage. He hasn't gotten there yet, right? More often, I was having these little moments of clarity. Times I knew for sure that I was an alcoholic. Times when I was looking at the bottom of my glass, asking myself, why am I doing this? Something had to give. Something had to change. I was suicidal, evaluating every part of my life for what could be wrong. It culminated in one last night of drinking and staring at the problem. It made me sick to think about it, and even sicker to continue drinking it anyway. I was forced to look at my drinking as the chief suspect. Forced. Gift of desperation. The next day, I went to work, late as usual, and all day long, I could not stop thinking about this very real problem. I could go no further. What was happening to me? Therapy hadn't fixed my life. All those sessions, I was still miserable. I might as well just kill myself, drink my way into oblivion. In one last desperate fight for a solution, I reviewed my life, searching for the missing link. Had I left out some crucial bit of information that would lead to a breakthrough, making it possible for life to become just a little more bearable? No, there was nothing, except, of course, my drinking. The next morning, I went to see my therapist. I told him I had decided to quit therapy because after 8 years, it wasn't working. But I decided to tell him I had been searching through my life for that missing link and had come up with only one thing I had never told him: that I drank. He began asking me questions. He asked about quantities, frequencies, what I drank. Before he was even halfway through, I broke down and began sobbing. I cried, "Do you think I have a problem with drinking?" He replied, "I think that is quite obvious." I then asked, "Do you think I'm an alcoholic?" And he answered, "You're going to have to find out for yourself." He pulled a list of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings out of his desk drawer. He had already highlighted the young people's meetings. He told me to go home and not drink for all the rest of the day. He would call me at 9 p.m. and wanted to hear I hadn't taken a drink. It was rough, but I went home and locked myself in my room, sweating it out until he called. He asked if I had had a drink. I told him I had not and asked what I should do next. He told me to do the same thing tomorrow, except tomorrow I should also go to the first meeting on the list as he had highlighted. The next day, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was 18 years old. I think that whole prior paragraph is discussing step one. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for about 15 minutes before the meeting started, trying to work up the courage to go in and face myself. I remember finally working up the nerve to open the door and get out, only to close the door, dismissing the notion of going into the meeting as ridiculous. This dance of indecisiveness went on about 50 times before I went in. Had I not gone in, I believe I would not be alive today. This next line sort of gave me a sense of when this guy wrote this. It depends on the area you are in, but I think in general, 80s, it had to be written between 76 and 01, right? It had to be written between the third edition and the fourth edition. But I think it was written, there's no mention of cell phones, there's no mention of computers, email, and now here with this next line, I think it's going to be in the 80s, early 90s, right as we phased out smoking in meetings. The room was very smoky and filled with apparently happy people. Finding a seat in the back, I sat down and tried to make sense of the format. When the chairperson asked if there were any newcomers present, I looked around and saw some hands go up, but I certainly wasn't ready to raise my hand and draw attention to myself. The meeting broke up into several groups, and I followed one group down the hall and took a seat. They opened a book and read a chapter titled Step 7. After the reading, they went around the table for comments, and for the first time in my life, I found myself surrounded by people I could really relate with. I no longer felt as if I was a total misfit, because here was a room full of people who felt precisely as I did, and a major weight had been lifted. I happened to be in the last chair. I happened to be in the last chair around the table to speak. And confused by the reading, all I could say was, what the heck are shortcomings? A couple of members, realizing I was there for my first meeting, took me downstairs and sat down with me and outlined the program. I can recall very little of what was said. I remember telling these members that this program they outlined sounded like just what I needed, but I didn't think I could stay sober for the rest of my life. Exactly how was I supposed to not drink if my girlfriend breaks up with me, or if my best friend dies, or even though through happy times like graduations, weddings, and birthdays? They suggested I could just stay sober one day at a time. They explained that it might be easier to set my sights on the 24 hours in front of me and to take on these other situations when and if they ever arrived. I decided to give sobriety a try, one day at a time, and I've done it that way ever since. When I entered Alcoholics Anonymous, I had done some damage physically, had a bouquet of mental quirks, and was spiritually bankrupt. There's the threefold disease. He's given us that there. I knew I was powerless over alcohol and that I needed to be open-minded towards what people suggested for recovery. However, when it came to spirituality, I fought it nearly every step of the way. Although raised in an ethnic and religious Jewish household, I was agnostic and very resistant to anyone and anything that I perceived to be imposing religious beliefs. To my surprise, Alcoholics Anonymous suggested something different. The idea that religion and spirituality were not one and the same was a new notion. My sponsor asked that I merely remain open-minded to the possibility that there was a power greater than myself, one of my own understanding. Step 2. He assured me that no person was going to impose a belief system on me, that it was a personal matter. Reluctantly, I opened my mind to the fact that maybe, just maybe, there was something to this spiritual lifestyle. Slowly but surely, I realized that indeed a power greater than myself, I realized that there was indeed a power greater than myself. And I soon found myself with a full-time God in my life and following a spiritual path that didn't conflict with any of my personal religious convictions. There's step 3. Following this spiritual path made a major difference in my life. It seemed to fill that lonely hole that I used to fill with alcohol. My self-esteem improved dramatically, and I knew happiness and serenity as I had never known it before. I started to see the beauty and usefulness in my own existence and tried to express my gratitude through helping others in whatever ways I could. There's some step 12. A confidence and faith entered my life and unraveled a plan for me that was bigger and better than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't easy, and it has never been easy, but it gets so much better. Since that first meeting, my life has changed completely. Since that first meeting, my life has completely changed. 3 months into the program, I started college. While many of my college classmates were experimenting with alcohol for the first time, I was off at meetings and AA get-togethers, becoming active in service work and developing relationships with God, family, friends, and loved ones. I rarely thought twice about this. It was what I wanted and needed to do. Over the last 7 years, that makes him 25 now. Over the last 7 years, nearly everything I thought I could not stay sober through has happened. Indeed, sobriety and life are full of ups and downs. Occasionally, depression can creep back into my life and requires outside help. However, this program has provided me with the tools to stay sober through the death of my best friends, failed relationships, and good times like birthdays, weddings, and graduations. Life is exponentially better than it ever was before. I'm living out the life I used to fantasize about, and I have a whole lot of work still in front of me. I have hope to share and love to give, and I just keep going one day at a time, living this adventure called life. I don't know about you guys, but that was a powerful story. I was affected by that story as I kind of prepared for tonight. And also the references keep going back to the 24-hour a day, the one day at a time. This is an excellent tool, I think, for the person that keeps projecting for the future, you know, the new man or woman who's projecting into the future one day at a time. And the only one other thing I just want to say, and I'll stop, was the significance of, he doesn't tell the therapist that he's drinking. He's trying to get well, but he holds back that one thing. And it reminded me of the same story as with Dr. Bob. It wasn't until Dr. Bob admitted to the Oxford group that he was in 2.5 years already that he had a drinking problem. And then all of a sudden, you know, that honesty, that jumping into the pool then cosmically sends Bill to Henrietta Seiberling. The forces of nature just miraculously the solution comes. So, you know, same thing here. So it did remind me of Dr. Bob's story also. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you so much.